Okay, apologies for that very rough start. In the previous Zoom, we acknowledged country and the elders that we've been working with in a number of nations across Australia, from North East Arnhem Land through to Sydney. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bentley James, a linguist and anthropologist who's lived in North East Arnhem Land for some 30 years, documenting and working with Yolŋu people there, preserving their rare Indigenous languages. His interests include sign, ritual, magic, social organisation, archaeology and material culture skills. And he revels really in creating projects that are in support of bilingual education, linguistic, cultural and biological diversity for new generations to continue the traditions of learning through new means and into the future. His collaboration with elderly regional knowledge holders, building two-way knowledge systems, is really giving a growing encouragement to the population of young people to access and continue these traditions. I really think, without further ado, Bentley, he's best to talk about his fabulous projects that he's been working on and that he will be sharing with us tonight, particularly his project on Yolŋu Sign Language. Thanks, Bentley.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everybody for coming along. I hope that you're all comfortable and warm and in a nice spot. Let's give a thought to those people living in North East Arnhem Land and also in the 72 prescribed communities around the Northern Territory who are living under the iron fist of the intervention and under the poverty line today. It is really very lovely to be here, and I'm very grateful for you coming along to listen to what I have to say about the illustrated handbook and the project that made it possible. So jumping along, this is Gutti. He's a young man from North East Arnhem Land who lives in Yirrakala, and he is deaf and has been from childhood, yet he's perfectly capable of being able to communicate with people throughout his community and more broadly in North East Arnhem Land because he is a user of Yolŋu Sign Language. What is important is the difference between primary sign languages and alternate sign languages. An alternate sign language is the kind of language that we use in North East Arnhem Land. Primary sign languages have been developed over the last 100 years or so to facilitate communication among non-hearing people and with people to hearing people, whereas Yolŋu hand sign language is a kind of alternate sign language, and that is a language that was developed in a hearing population. That population shaped the language of signs in such a way that it meets their needs in a hearing population and is also the primary language of non-hearing signers. So Michael, whom we're looking at the moment, Ganambard from Gullywinkle, who's been deaf since birth, is a wonderful communicator, and he is able to speak to everybody in the community and involve himself in sports, arts, dance, ritual, everything, because everybody in the community uses Yolŋu Sign Language. But Yolŋu Sign Language is under threat. And that's what this project is about. So just briefly, I will show you this book, which is the Handbook of Yolŋu Sign Languages from North East Arnhem Land. And this book comes out of the same project as this book, which is the Yan-nhanu Atlas and Illustrated Dictionary of the Crocodile Islands. These books were developed by Laurie Baymarrwana. So today we will examine the connections between the two projects. Michael, who has been deaf since he was born, is a great communicator. I want you to look, when you see him moving, at his body language. As some people say that body language accounts for some 70 to 80% of our meaning. I beg your pardon? This is the hand sign for playing cards. And Michael is doing a beautiful job of interpreting the entire card playing activity with gestures. So what is the difference between gesture and sign? A gesture, I beg your pardon, next slide. Oops. Gestures are mediated by the kind of language used in the community, and grammar accounts for about 4 different ways in which gestures are activated and used in a language, whereas sign is a very distinctive and arbitrarily signified way of communicating that a speech community agrees to. So, for example, this thumbs up sign, which is okay in English-speaking communities, is apparently rude in Afghanistan and apparently also in Greece. However, later, with the invent of Western technologies, in those communities, it now has 2 meanings. In fact, for those who can remember far back enough in Australia to do that with the right kind of other body language was also a rude sign. So a speech community gives meaning to a sign. And in that way, it's capable of being able to produce much more significant meaning than just gesture. Unfortunately, the Yolŋu sign language, like so many other Australian languages, is disappearing. I want to bring your attention to the bottom of the screen where it says Yan-nhanu. Baymarrwana and I worked together since 1993 to make language projects and resources for students so that they could continue to use their language. However, Yan-nhanu language was only spoken by her, so it was already very, very endangered. At the same time, we also wanted to learn and teach children Yolŋu sign language, especially Yan-nhanu sign language, which is particular to the Crocodile Islands. But because of the wait and time necessary, we needed to focus on the Yan-nhanu language. The reason why these signs are so endangered comes mostly from the wider society and the way that we have dealt with relations between Indigenous people and the state. Sign languages of the kind that Yolŋu sign language are extremely perishable. Most Indigenous languages in Australia had a parallel or alternate sign language with them, but many of them were lost very early because they're so incredibly perishable. And they're perishable mostly because the environments in which they are used are on country and in connection to land. And so when people's link to country is broken, these highly perishable signs also disappear. So that is why it became so necessary to do this project. This is Laurie Baymarrwana, Senior Australian of the Year 2012, who spoke no English and in her 90s was a courageous fighter for her language and culture. Here is a short video that introduces Baymarrwana.
On one of the most remote islands in Australia lives an ancient Yan-nhanu woman. She has lived on her island for nearly 100 years, surviving off the land and sea. Throughout her life, she has fought to maintain her culture and protect her ancient language from extinction. To the Yan-nhanu, she is Big Boss, the last leader of the Crocodile Islands.
Yolŋu people live in the Crocodile Islands and they are exclusively sea people. So they are the last of the exclusively sea people in Australia. The area that is shaded blue is that of people using Yolŋu languages. Yolŋu mata, Yolŋu meaning person, mata meaning tongue, the common tongue, people's tongue. Yan-nhanu is the language of the Crocodile Islands and seas. Yan means tongue, language, and nhanu means this or here. It is the language of here. So from the east in Blue Mud Bay to the west in the Crocodile Islands, all people use the Yolŋu mata language, but they also have a number of languages that belong specifically to their country, depending on how you divide them. There's up to 60 different languages in North East Arnhem Land. All of these languages have names for places, and these are important connections to country. And one of the things that is so important about language, and therefore this project's attempt to save those near invisible links to country of language, is the language that these names are in. In the Crocodile Islands, Baymarrwana and I were lucky enough to spend some 20 years mapping over 600 sites. And in those sites, all of the songs and connections to country that make those songs, the language they use, and the language around them into examples of ancestral essence, like artworks, like material culture, like songs, like the pattern of clapstick. These things are owned by groups and by people in those groups. This is Murrunga Island, and this is where Baymarrwana was born, somewhere around 1914 to 1917. She can't remember, and there is nobody else alive who can remember either. Baymarrwana was a very strong leader, but an incredibly generous, gracious, and kind woman. She understood that she had very little time left to do what she wanted to do, and that is pass on the knowledge of the ancestors to a new generation of young people speaking Yan-nhanu and also Yolŋu mata. Let's have a little listen to Baymarrwana.
Kalat sebelah kapo, manaba, nangkung ngarako, lagi ngarako, ngarako, Baymarrwana, Baymarrwana, malara, ayah ngarakula, Yan-nhanu, Murrunga ko, kalian ko. Kabago kapo indigo yan nga naman nga kabila nga.
So not absolutely easy to see, but implied in everything that Baymarrwana is saying is this idea of links to country in language, that it is the language that the ancestors sung as they created the world that is also part of what is important and belongs to the people of the country. And that's what this book is attempting to hold. Unfortunately, Baymarrwana died before we could finish this book. It took nearly 30 years to complete, but it is a book that is aimed at exactly the kind of thing Baymarrwana wanted to do. That is, save those tiny invisible links of language to country and people. So in order to better understand how that works, we're going to have a look at the book she did first. In her work, attempting to get the children of an older generation, a newer generation, I beg your pardon, to understand their language, she had to do a lot of different economically viable activities. So she created ranger programs and cultural heritage programs and turtle conservation programs in order to attract those young people to full-time or part-time work on their country that would allow them to access ongoing
He knows about the Aboriginal ones at least.
touching of country, allowing them to be able to be part of the country that they listen.
He's an
and-
anthropologist that's been working with a particular Aboriginal group for a long time.
The Yan-nhanu Atlas
Very interesting.
on the bottom and the Yan-nhanu Ecological Knowledge Database Process and the Bilingual Bimodal Resources Project are all projects that link into this book.
My God, I wasn't on.
Book grows out of the need to be able to pass on these near invisible links to a new generation. This book was then given to children in schools, homelands and ranger programs across North East Arnhem Land at Baymarrwana's behest and at her expense. These books were made by a very, very old lady on the island of Murrunga. And the lady who made these books was nearly 100 years old.
Yolŋu reminded me that we shouldn't just be looking through a Ballanda lens at the world that we deal with, but also making sure that we look through the lens of Aboriginal people.
These books are in 3 languages, English and in Dual and in Yan-nhanu.
They can learn everything there now in that book.
This is the place of the ancestors. This is a country like no other in the world. It has stories and rocks and paintings and knowledge and dances and words that have been here for 50,000 years that are just waiting to be rediscovered.
The fact that they have got something left behind by the old girl is profoundly heartening to see.
This old lady wants you to have these books because she wants you to have the chance to learn about your history from a long, long, long time ago. And that is a gift for you. That is a present from the old lady to you. So Baymarrwana was very, very generous and kind and gracious and had a mind like a steel trap. There was absolutely nothing that she could not remember. If, for example, I had lost a notebook or said, where was that word? She would be able to say, it was in the blue one, you know, the one that you had yesterday. She had the most magnificent memory. And it's that memory that allowed her to be able to recount such an incredible story about her country, where she had lived for 100 years. So let's have a look at the story of the Yan-nhanu Atlas and the things that are inside it, so we can see from where the links of the Yolŋu Sign Language book comes and get an idea of the connections to country that are understood to be part of the way that people live in the world. The Atlas has 3 parts. The first part is about where we are and what it means. all of it translated from Yan-nhanu into Yolŋu, the language that everyone in the North East Arnhem Land speaks, and also English for non-Yolŋu speakers. The second part is a history of photography by famous photographers, and they include Lloyd W. Warner, Donald Thompson, Sir Hubert Wilkins, Edward Rickenbach Ryko, Papa Sheppy, Papa Webb. Everybody who took photographs over that 100-year period has photographs in this amazing book, which are then translated by Baymarrwana, showing what they meant, who was there, why they were there, and then translated into English so we can all understand. Baymarrwana gives us an indication in her language of what it is that she wants us to take away from this book and the projects surrounding it. Of course, the Atlas is an enormous work, so it has a how to use guide with pronunciation and what language is involved and how to understand its organization. But it also has a critical triptych. This piece of information I have been looking at for over 30 years now, and it's still not easily clear to me. So I'm not expecting you to pick it up immediately, and there won't be a test at the end of this. But this triptych describes the invisible links between country and song and people and generations passing back in time. And it's this understanding that we will examine very quickly in a crash course of ancestral links to country and language that explains why it is that across Australia, hand signs of the kind of alternate sign language were ubiquitous. And also, unfortunately, when people were removed from country, why those signs were so quickly perishable. So this first picture shows Murrunga Island, which Baymarrwana was born so many years ago. There are 3 songs in the blue color. They are Dua songs, and the 3 songs in Yiddish color. Dua and Yiddish are 2 aspects or ways or parts of the world and universe that are comprehensive and that share together in such a way that they create the conditions for fertility, much as yin and yang, containing some of each other and at the same time being opposite and comprehensive. So Dua songs in blue link named sites through music and song and clapstick patterns, and Yiddish named sites link songs to areas on country and clapstick patterns and drone pipe patterns, and these things are owned by the people who play and use them through an understanding of kinship. Dua and Yiddish, complementary halves of the universe, then translate into ancestral essences, which are part of the way that bodies are made, part of the environment, part of the named places. All of these places then coalescing their ancestral essences into what we in English often call estates, but more accurately, perhaps they might be described as focal areas that radiate out ancestral essences. Those essences, those linkages to country, are the same material as the bones of the father that he passes on to his children, and his children pass those on to their male children through the patriline. The female part of the generations then pass on the flesh, or the parts of their bodies that create the conditions for continuity. These kinship relations are expressed in patterns of marriage or connubia. Those links, those people who live and are part of one particular clan coming through the patriline, pass on their daughters to those of the next group, who then pass on their male children's ancestral essences to those of the next group through their daughters, in a system of marriages that includes sometimes 9, 10 or more groups, and those groups continue to pass on this pattern of reproduction through time. And in this area here, since the last sea rise, with the sea becoming approximately where it is now about 10,000 years ago, this has been the pattern. The pattern that precedes this pattern is exactly the same, but without the sea around it. And it is this pattern of continuing marriages through time that are evidenced in recent archaeological finds that have found that DNA taken from hair samples coming from sites are the same as DNA samples in modern living Indigenous people from that area. So a site-based relationship with country is evidenced by genetic evidence going back some 50,000 years. Relationship of people to country is enormously deep, very difficult to imagine. Much of the knowledge of this country is remembered in songs, and Baymarrwana and I mapped these wonderful songs on country. We also mapped the regional seasonal resources and the kinds of things that were in the environment in English and in Yan-nhanu and in Yolŋu and in Latin. Also, we mapped the seasonal pattern of inter-island travel used by Baymarrwana and her family before the coming of the missionaries in 1922. So a direct reference to actual patterns of movement throughout the islands to access seasonally available resources as followed by the people of the country going back, we don't know how long, but certainly an enormous time depth and the knowledge associated with incredibly sophisticated. The fish traps of the Crocodile Islands, again, are a very, very interesting and deeply, profoundly interesting way of living in the world. Just the rocks that come from the surrounding areas, those in situ rocks, have about 10 names in Yan-nhanu. In other languages, similarly large amounts of names for kinds of rocks. And then other kinds of rocks that also appear in the environment are those that have been transported in. So rocks of the kind of cutting stones, pounding stones, stones used for grinding, stones used for eating like gundir, stones used for trade, stones used for colour, rechpa, mikko, butalak. These kinds of stones are all to be found in the vicinity of the fish traps, as are freshwater resources, a freshwater well, and also a jungle of the kind that includes all of the species of plants that people used in their everyday. Those kinds of things made spears or fruit or vegetables that we used were reproduced in that area. So the farming idea is very clearly mapped in the what would you call them, amenities that surrounds fish traps and freshwater sites. Also includes these wonderful photographs, and this one taken by Lloyd Warner on the beach at Milangimbi is of the Nara ceremony, a Yiddish Nara ceremony. The book includes ceremonies in which women were allowed to handle men's spears as part of the initiation ceremonies, wearing, as we see, the nanmara mats, very important part of material culture. This is Angujajia, or the dako, or the fish trap. This is on the mainland on Cape Stewart, a photograph by Donald Thompson, but Baymarrwana made quite a few of these fish traps in her career. The white shell that you see hanging on the stick is there for a very specific purpose. The stick and the shell scare away the mukoi. There's the hand sign for mukoi, the spirits of the dead. Those mukoi interfere with the fish catching. But another important aspect of fish trap usage is that there is to be no mention of fishing and no loud noises or shouting around the fish trap. So hand signs were always used around the fish trap. Modes of travel, of course, this bark canoe is of the kind known as barawan. There were much larger ones created by Yan-nhanu people as well. But these handy, very quick to make craft were very fast over water, and Donald Thompson records them having made very, very quick journeys from Murrunga back to Milangimbi. But these craft would undo at sea, and when they did, the people would have to swim. These craft are also associated with stories of truly enormous crocodiles. The new kind of canoe, the lipa, the kind that was brought to North East Arnhem Land by the Macassans over the last 400 years or so, was a floating hollow log canoe, hollowed out of a tree, and that canoe would float. So if it tipped over, you might have lost some bits and pieces, but you could always scramble back into it and make your way between the islands. A very, very grateful invention. Housing styles and the way that people used their environment, which was often very full of mosquitoes and sandflies, and the winds of their environment to capture the best places to stay and live. Perched up on top of big sand dunes or in hills of shellfish, middens, these kind of gatawuro, the housing style we're looking at here, had a fire that burnt beneath them, and that fire would keep the sandflies and mosquitoes away while people sat in the daytime. And of course, this project is and most directed towards children and giving back to the children. So that's what this is about. The atlas in 3 languages includes practice sentences in English, Yolŋu and Yan-nhanu, parts of speech, and glorious illustrations. It has English finder list in a English alphabetical order and Yolŋu finder list in Yolŋu bilingual alphabetical order, which keeps all of the sounds of the Yolŋu language together so they're easy for people to recognize. For example, the 4 different kinds of N sound, N, Ng, N, and Nya. So people who are familiar with Yolŋu languages will know how difficult it is to get your tongue around those wonderful N sounds. Also, the book is divided into teaching domains for teachers and students, as is the Yolŋu hand sign guide. So too, the handbook has a grammar for teachers and learners. So it is easy for people to be able to structure in the way that the language uses its conventions, the signs that they learn. The illustrated handbook also has practice sentences and a learner guide. This book has been distributed to the children in the homelands, at the schools and the ranger programs across North East Arnhem Land, again for free. This time, not at Baymarrwana's expense, but at the expense of some of the wonderful volunteers that gave, including the lady who is the Yellow Wiggle. She gave $20,000 to get this project. And there was a few others who also gave so generously, too many to mention now, but to those people, very grateful because they have helped to save and hand out back to the kids these wonderful, wonderful signs. The thing about sign language, and this one in particular, is that it emerges from the community and its relation to each other and the economic and ecological imperatives of the land in which people live. So dance and magic and mimicry and all of the things necessary to carry out life on the islands and on the mainland are captured within the sign language. So it's completely capable of being able to express any of the things that we need to express completely silently. One of the things that Baymarrwana was very, very strong on was that there must be explicit teaching of hand signs around fish traps. This is also something that people across North East Arnhem Land understand, because one of the laws of the fish trap is that there must be no loud noises, no shouting, and certainly no mention of the idea that people are fishing, because the ancestors who are listening are waiting for any indication that people are fishing, and they will empty the fish trap of the fish. So that is why nobody ever speaks about fishing before, when, during, and after they've been fishing. Sign language is a wonderful way for us to be able to understand secret connections between people. So that if you wanted to talk to somebody while somebody was talking to you and they were at distance, you could easily signify to them what you wanted to do with sign, both visible to the person who's speaking to you with voice or invisible to them. So it's a great way of being able to keep secrets, or in the company kin that you have to avoid, to be able to make sure that you don't transgress any of those avoidance rules amongst kin. Sign language allows you really deeply, profoundly subtle communication without making a noise. The book, with its learner's guide and all of its parts, its alphabetical organisation, its indexed organisation, it's grouped into those areas that are interest. So for cooking, for kinship, for modern life, for occupations, gives the book a usability that is good for anybody who wants to learn Yolŋu mata, because it is all mapped in Yolŋu mata, but also the signs. And also, if you happen to be a Yolŋu speaker, it's also in English. So you can use it as a tool for education in any of the three languages. So it has a grammar in all three as well. It also has something that's absolutely remarkable. Thanks to Baymarrwana, there is a class of hand signs that are almost unheard of by our younger generation. And these are the idiomatic hand signs. These are hand signs that belong to an era before the coming of Europeans. So this lady, dear lady, unfortunately passed away during the making of this book project. But she was a very capable signer. Her uncle had been non-hearing, and she was also able to help us do these signs, so they are also captured. Now, idioms, as you know, are things like 5 sheets to the wind, these are things that we say that don't actually mean what they say. And similarly, idioms in sign do the same kind of thing. So the sign that you see Sheridan at the front of the book with her hands like this doing is a sign that means Yolŋu, which is dear or precious. And this sign, buku, which means forehead or hill, when joined together, hill or forehead, dear, makes the hand sign for thank you. And that is the kind of idiomatic hand signs that were almost unheard of, unrecorded, which we also have a wonderful collection of in this book. So it has been a remarkable journey. I was lucky enough to travel around to all of these communities for the 3rd time in order to be able to hand out these books and meet again with old friends, old students, and also new students, and talk about the book and hand it out to the schools. The launch was wonderful. It was supported by buku lange, buku, head, hill, and lange in this construction is sunshine. So it means the morning sun of North East Arnhem Land touching your head. And the meaning of that is welcome. So these wonderful, wonderful people at Buku Lange gave money and support to us to help us do this book and also to do the book launch. So we're very, very grateful to Buku Lange. They have wonderful insight there and they do wonderful work. So at the beginning, I said that it would be possible that we could look at the ancestral links that made this book, like the Yan-nhanu Atlas and like all of the other projects by Baymarrwana, about connections to country, which is the really, really important thing for people on country. If you wish, you can make a donation to this work and its continuity, because we are going to try and create an online version for schools in North East Arnhem Land and more broadly. But in order to do so, we need funding. And that, let me assure you, over the years has been a very difficult thing to come by. So if you want to participate and help, you can purchase a copy of the book. The book is absolutely magnificent, and you will not only get a book, but you will also be helping us to create an online version for kids in school, and hopefully you'll learn some signs. If you go to the website at the bottom of the screen, yolŋusignlanguage.com.au, you will be able to find the book for purchase. I can say little more than thank you. Thank you all so very much for listening. I hope it wasn't too tiresome. Very kind of you. Please be well.
Thank you, Bentley. That was fabulous. My apologies to you and to the audience for the rather rocky start we had, but I think we will all agree that it was well worth the wait. I just think your work with Baymarrwana and other Yolŋu elders and young people coming up is just amazing. The depth of information that has been funneled through, if you like, into each of these projects is just mind-boggling, truly. It's both beautiful, I thought, and also quite poignant in a way, because I think it indicates, certainly to those of us who live down south, where the colonial contact was incredibly early and violent. It gives you an indication of the kinds of knowledges that were potentially lost down here in this part of the world. And so, yeah, a bittersweet. I think the books are incredible, and a lot of people have been asking in the chat about getting a hold of it. So I'm glad you've shared that information. But I'll also let people know that we will follow up with some posts on our museum social media, and we will also probably have a bit of an edit and a reposting of this full talk online. So some other questions that came through just quickly, because I know you may need to get away and you haven't been well, and so I appreciate that you've spoken to us through a cold. One of the questions that was asked was about whether the grammar of the signed Yolŋu was similar or different to the spoken language. Can you share a view on that?
Quite right. Yes, so they do have very, very similar kinds of groups of ideas around them, because they grow out of the same needs to communicate. So they are very similar. However, the simplified grammar of the sign language is the easiest thing in the world to learn. And if I had only learned that first, I think I might have been speaking Yolŋu a little bit more quickly. So it follows a thing called a sort of natural semantic collection of coagulation of ideas. So the verb in the communication usually comes first. So you can say, for example, if you're going to the shop, you'll just do going. There we go. So it's very easy to learn the grammar, but it does have reflection on spoken grammar. So there is a relationship between them, but the natural grammar is very, very easy to learn, and it makes hand signing so useful, because you can speak about complex things over distance without any difficulty at all. that little hand sign just means, please get me some money. You often see that one.
I'd need to learn that sign as well. Some people wanted to know, just at a more general level, how you got started in this work.
In 1989, I went to Yolŋu to work for Walpri Media Association as a volunteer. And for the 2 years that I was there, I was lucky enough to run into, well, 2 wonderful people. 3, good Lord, there's so many, isn't there? Look, Frank Barder, amazing. His wife, Wendy Barder, the linguist. Peter Toyne, the headmaster of the school. My brother, Glenn James, who ran the Wallakalong Artists Association. All of these people were immensely interested in language and how it worked to continue links with country, community and business. And so from there, I was filming old men and old ladies doing business on country, and I became absolutely besotted. At that time, I also came across the work of Adam Kendon, who had only just left, and his amazing work on hand signs. So it was truly an amazing time to be at Yolŋu, and from there I found an undying appreciation for the value of being able to communicate silently through sign, but also of what it is that language gives us in regard to our kinship to country in Australia, not the English language. Beautiful that it is, the language of Keating and Keats and Milton and the Bible, you know, a wonderful language. Professor Henry Higgins would have, but Yolŋu language or Indigenous language connected to country has such an incredibly valuable connection to each other, to the people, to the land, to what's going on, that it is crucial. And so there is little wonder people are working so hard to get their languages up and running again, and little wonder the government is doing everything it possibly can to undermine such programs. Particularly the Northern Territory Education Department making illegal bilingual education for the first 4 hours of the school day, a very short-sighted intervention.
I think we might have time for just one more question, which I just have to find because I've written down. Oh, so one of the questions was, and you might have answered this, but some people are wondering whether some of the videos were available as part of the book product or alongside the book product or through the website. Is that an option? Is that something you've looked at?
There are about
7.
Sure. So no, they are not part of the book production part, but there were about 6 videos made around Baymarrwanga's work during the time that we were trying to get the government to help us start up the ranger programs. And so they were tools used at that period. Also then when Baymarrwana won the Senior Australian of the Year award, we had to create a couple of different video parts for television. So they were available online. In fact, the documentary Big Boss, Last Leader of the Crocodile Islands, won the UNESCO Indigenous Filmmakers Award for Paul Sinclair and the Miri Miri filmmakers from Sydney in 2017, I believe it was. And they are a remarkable unit, Miri Miri, and the people in them are very, very hardworking, giving people greater opportunity to see Indigenous film. I would ask them to see if they could put it back online, and I'll see if I can find some way of getting those films online in such a way that they can be viewed. If not through YouTube or something like that, of course, I'm totally illiterate in all of this, perhaps through my website, blog, and there might be some way of connecting them to that so people can watch them there. But they really are wonderful. They are generally all in Yolŋu or Yan-nhanu language, and then with subtitles that show precisely what's being said. And they truly do show some remarkable parts of an amazing world, a world that we have absolutely no experience of and we've never seen. The lady who lived in a tin shack on an island 50 kilometres off the coast with no running water and no power, who was able to win the Australian of the Year award, who spoke no English and was deeply grateful for the honour.
No, I agree with you. That was a really special moment and a great acknowledgement to her and all her work with you and others, and her for her community, for that next generation, that sort of vision that she had. I'd just like to thank you again, Bentley, for taking time out and speaking to us and to our audience. I would also like to thank our Auslan interpreters, Rebecca Kent and Amanda Galea. We will also post on our social media information about Bentley's books and projects with Yolŋu, and hopefully the university's Fisher Library might purchase a copy to reside in that archive, alongside a really extensive archive of Yolŋu cultural heritage in the form of photographs, like some of those that Bentley showed as part of his presentation, Lloyd Warner and Theodore Webb, one of the missionaries up there, and also the art that people can experience in the exhibition that's currently on display in the Chau Chak Wing Museum. That was a collaborative project with Yolŋu of the art centres of Milingimbi, Ramingining and Yirrkala, Bukulange Molka, the centre that Bentley mentioned, promoting the book. Our last promo, and after thanking Bentley, is that the Darwin Art Fair starts tomorrow. Because of COVID, they will be online, but all of those Yolŋu art centres will have artwork that taps into this amazing heritage that Bentley has shared aspects with us tonight. And if you would like a little piece of that in your home, a bit like the kind of artwork that's behind me and behind this knowledge system, this amazing knowledge system, yeah, think about going online to the Darwin Art Fair and buying a work alongside the book. Thank you all for your patience with the presentation, and thank you and good night from Gamaragal country.